All right. Um, all right. So thank you for joining our session. We are meeting here today for the discussion number 5. How can open education help us to make our teaching anti-racist? And so our presenters are a community from College of the Canyons here in California, Open Education Global, and Northern Virginia Community College. Our presenters are Kim Grewe, Joy Shoemate, Una Daly, and James Glapa-Grossklag. And want to make sure that everyone is aware that we're using automated Zoom captions during this live event. And we will edit the recording transcripts before we share them with you in order to be more accurate. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you'll see a closed caption button. Underneath that icon, it will say live transcript. You'll be able to choose between keeping it on or off as you prefer. And we encourage questions in the chat, so please feel free to share those as we proceed in the presentation. So now I am going to pass the mic to our presenters.
Thank you very much, Maria. Hi, everybody. James Glapa-Grossklag with College of the Canyons. I'm going to kick things off here. First of all, congratulations to everybody with the Peralta Equity Conference. What a fabulous idea. It makes so much sense to have an event dedicated to this topic. And I thank everybody with the Peralta Equity Conference for organizing this. And I personally am so happy to see not only a lot of sessions devoted to all kinds of equity topics, but also a lot of open education woven in throughout the sessions. So we're going to get a little bit more explicit about that connection this afternoon with our discussion centered around how can we use open education to help us make our teaching anti-racist in an explicit way. I'm here with a wonderful group of partners, and they can each introduce themselves. Una, you want?
Yes, thanks, James. I was busy typing in the chat window.
Sorry, Una.
Una Daly, the director of the Community College Consortium for OER at Open Education Global, and thrilled to be here with you today to talk about this pilot program.
Thank you, Una. And Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Grewe. I do work at Northern Virginia Community College as an instructional designer, among other things. I do a lot of side gigs too. I'm an instructional designer, online course facilitator, and curriculum developer. And I am just absolutely delighted to be part of this team and this project.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
And Joy?
Hi, yes, my name is Joy Shoemate. I'm the director of online education at College of the Canyons. We're thrilled to be with you all and share about this project. It has been an enjoyable experience to participate in, so we're happy to be here with you.
Thank you, Joy. And then in the center of the slide, you see our colleague Liz Yada, also with Open Education Global. She's not with us today, but she's an essential part of our team. Also, part of our project that we're going to use as the basis for discussion today are some advisory coaches. We want to acknowledge Maritez Apijo at Contra Costa College, Elisa Cooper at Glendale College in Arizona, not in Southern California, Aloha Sargent, Cabrillo College, and Micah Young with Pasadena City College. And we also want to acknowledge the support of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation of this project. And again, the project we'll tell you about in a second, that it will form the basis of our discussion. And here's our agenda, a reminder of what you saw in the program. The outcomes for the session are, by the end, you should be able to describe anti-racist pedagogy, which is a very tall order, in fact, and discuss how open education can support anti-racist pedagogy. Our brief agenda is that Una and I will provide a brief overview of the Open for Anti-Racism program, which again informs our discussion. We'll share a couple of definitions, and Kim and Joy will really lead the meat of the discussion, sharing those definitions, providing some examples of work that's been done by participants in the program, and then they're going to engage you in a discussion around how you think that you or we, if we can in fact utilize open education to make our teaching anti-racist. And with that, we'll move on. Real quick, The program, Open for Anti-Racism, consists of the following major components. Our participants in the program explored how to use OER and open pedagogy to make their instructional materials and teaching more anti-racist. They learned about anti-racist pedagogy, OER or open educational resources, and open pedagogy in a facilitated online course designed and facilitated by Kim and Joy. The participants also developed and implemented action plans to make an immediate change in their teaching practice. And those are some examples that Kim and Joy will share shortly. In an ongoing manner, our participants are benefiting from wraparound support, peer connections, monthly web coaching, and as with any good project, we are documenting our impact. So we'll have more to share as the project wraps itself up in June and July. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Una.
Yes, so thank you, James. And so once again, this is a project where we reached out to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation to really start looking at how do we make our classrooms more anti-racist. And so with their help, we were able to launch an application, a request for application with California community colleges. We received over 300 applications in about 7 or 8 days. So we only had 17 slots. So it was really tough to make that decision, but we worked with our coaches, that whole team to whittle it down, and we would have loved to have had everybody. But you can see that there was a wide variety of disciplines that actually of the faculty teach in. So administration of justice, biology, business, chemistry, counseling, early childhood education, English, ESL, history, etc., social and sociology. So just, great career ed and also the academic subject. So a lot of wonderful work going on. Next slide. And just like this presentation, it's a one-year program and it's very fast. So January was the course. And after that, they jumped in right in February. Many of them started the implementation of their action plan for their spring semester. And we're finishing up now in May and doing all of the pieces around the research. Next slide, please. So, once again, this program is around how can you use an open educational resources and open pedagogy to make your classroom anti-racist. And so quickly, the definition of open educational resources, many of you may know, but these are freely available learning materials that can be copied, edited, and shared to better serve all students. So that's a big freedom for faculty and for students as well, because as we go to our next slide, open pedagogy is about involving your students in both the content of the classroom and also the practices of the classroom. And some wonderful research that has been done by one of our colleagues in the CUNY system, the City University of New York system. She took a look at open textbooks, so open educational resources, and compared those with publisher textbooks and found that they're about the same in terms of poor representation of historically marginalized groups. So we have a lot of work to do there, but with an open license, faculty and students can work together on bringing in that information that is missing from our textbooks. And next slide, please. So open pedagogy, sometimes called OER enabled pedagogy, is all about providing students with choices around how they demonstrate their learning, and making sure that these are assignments that aren't just something that is shared between you and the student, but can actually be shared more widely and potentially have influence on their future career choices as well. And I think that next slide, please.
I think we're
Yes,
passing the baton.
Yes, I'm passing the baton where Kim and Joy will share with you how they found how the faculty came in and learned about OER and open pedagogy and anti-racism. I'm sorry, Kim, taking over your time. I just wanted to say that the faculty who we chose had really varied levels of expertise with this. From some of them had none to some of them were quite advanced. And over to you.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Una. You didn't take my time at all. And that's a great lead in because yes, as a designer, Joy and I, we had to decide, how are we going to approach this? Because it's a sensitive topic. It's also very personal to talk about your own teaching and learning and how you might make it better and how it might not be up to snuff at the moment. And so all of those considerations were very important. And we decided to structure these. It's a 4-week online asynchronous course experience for the participants. And Joy and I co-facilitated it as well as co-designed and developed it. And we developed it around the major themes. First, we had to make sure that everybody, no matter where they were in their understanding of anti-racism, we certainly had to operationalize it and talk about what it meant in the context of teaching and learning with our students here. And then secondly, we looked at OER and sort of looked at those materials as curriculum development. How can we make our curriculum and our materials more anti-racist, or how can those support anti-racism? And then we looked at those open pedagogical approaches, or the OER enabled approaches to teaching and learning, and how that can connect to anti-racism tenets and approaches. And so once we sort of at a very rapid pace through that material then, and as we were going through that material, we were scaffolding all along with the idea that this action plan, and that was something that's very unique about this program, is that the idea was to do something now. A lot of us felt very compelled and wanted to take action. And even though we're part of institutions where the intentions are great and the verbiage is out there, things have to go through curriculum committees, et cetera, et cetera. So we just wanted to get something going right now that that faculty could do. So we wanted to build in opportunity to work on this action plan with colleagues, with facilitators, with coaches during the course of the 4-week online experience. And we use small group discussions, large group, whole group sharing of work and discussions, and self-reflections to do that. And we also use universal design, UDL principles, universal design for learning principles in our approach. And we encouraged faculty to submit work in a manner that suited them best, that played to their strength, that allowed them to communicate best and be understood best. And that worked out really well. We got a wide range of materials for reflections, from presentations to picto charts to audio a podcast, not a podcast, but audio files and things like this. So that was the online experience. And again, the action plan was the culminating event. And so are we to next slide? Yeah, I think Joy.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim. So, it was really important for our participants, for all of us to explore together what anti-racist pedagogy meant. So it's important for us to share it with you all too. I'm not one for reading slides, but I really love this quote. I think it's important that we take a moment to appreciate the words that are on the slide, which is that really anti-racist pedagogy, isn't simply about incorporating racial content. And it's really about, evaluating how we teach our content. And especially, I love the end that this is regardless of subject matter. And that was really important, especially because the participants in this program were representing such a wide range of disciplines. That's important, that's intentional. And it was important, Kim and I felt as we were designing the course, that all of the faculty going through this program felt that they could put this work into practice, regardless of the discipline in which they were teaching. Next slide, please. Perfect. So again, just a little more information. And if you attended our presentation yesterday, I apologize if this is redundant, but it's always good to revisit. Really in terms of defining anti-racist pedagogy, being race conscious. And one of the topics we discussed was how I think approaching things from a colorblind perspective, how actually harmful that can be for us as individuals and when we're approaching our students in that way. So being explicitly race conscious, and to think about how each of our disciplines have been structurally impacted by racism. So really trying to dismantle how our courses and our content might be centered around whiteness, and we may not explicitly recognize that initially, but considering whose voices are included in the content, and also recognizing the opportunity to elevate the voices and the experiences and honor the voices and the experiences of our students, and how important it is to actually bring our students in to the learning, and they can be active participants in their learning and also in creating this content that is anti-racist. So, next slide.
Yeah, so the action plan, again, we tried to walk the talk, and we're using open pedagogy in this course. And so we made a nebulous sort of assignment. We didn't give a lot of structure to the problem or the assignment itself, the action plan, but we did bring in a lot of scaffolding along the way, as I mentioned before, and then the coaching and the support services and the wraparound services that Una had mentioned before. And so in general, just wanted to tell you that the plan was basically what can you do in your courses to make them more explicitly anti-racist. And we asked participants to think about this semester what they're going to do, but then also on down the line, you know, how are you going to extend this and keep it going and maybe even grow it, bring others in. And we got as many a varied and diverse and wonderful array of projects as there are participants in the program. But because today's more about you all and discussing with you how we can all work to make our teaching more anti-racist, I think we're going to kind of just move into the discussion. And I think we can reference a couple of those plans as we move along. But since time is moving along, is that okay, James? Is that how you want to head? So we can actually begin the discussion then.
Perfect, Kim. Thank you.
Great. So the first kind of question that we were asking ourselves and asking our participants, and that really we want to open up to all of you to get started on this discussion, is in order to make your class anti-racist, what do you wish to change in your instructional material? Again, we were coming from the approach in teaching and informing, I should say, our participants about OER and about open pedagogy and how those can be leveraged. But that may not necessarily be in your case, but we do want to open up the discussion and bring you all in and hear what wonderful ideas you have to share with us.
And I don't know if Peralta Equity is assisting with the moderation, but according to my point of view, with 37 participants, I think you can use your microphone. We'd love to hear your voice. We'd love to see you and hear from you. I think we can try it that way to start. Let me give you an example, if I may. James has mentioned this before. It really struck me yesterday. He used to teach history, he said, and he mentioned his syllabus and how the chapters were of the time of Columbus et al. Was called the Age of Exploration. And we talked about how, you know, that is so white centered, so European centered. Like for many people, that's the age of colonization. That's the age of slavery. That's the age of, you know, terrible oppression. And so that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And sometimes we're so used to or so enmeshed that we use that thing with the fish swimming in the water. You don't really realize the water's around you. You know, so just take a moment, and we don't mind a moment of silence while you think, but think about your subject area, your discipline. Think about the materials there. Is there anything in those instructional materials that's been bothering you or doesn't work or you think needs to change, especially within this lens? So take a minute to think. We'd love to hear from you. And I do see that Melissa has shared via the chat here. She wishes that there was equivalent readings that are audio, video, and written so students could choose. And I think that's a very good a very good idea. A lot of times it's very static and just text-based, you know, text is all. It's rigor if it's text. More direct
Hi, can you all hear me? I was going to try to chime in. Can you
Yes,
all hear me?
please, Morgan. Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, great. I was thinking, I'm an English faculty member, and one of my largest areas of frustration is around writing handbooks and the sort of tone. It's a very elitist and sort of exclusionary tone. There's a lot of sort of like, instead of sort of like referencing, I don't know, a range of possibilities, or it doesn't situate writing choices within this idea that there are many, many Englishes, and there are many writing choices, and so I just find them very exclusionary and very elitist, and I would love to see someone create a writing, support document that is much more centered in, just so much more centered in like referencing academic writing as a dialect, just like other dialects, and it's situated within certain value systems, and that all of us have to learn it. It's not something that people are born talking. It's an acquired language for all of us. And that would be, I don't have the time to make that right now, but that would be my dream OER addition to an English course.
Thank you for that. And I used to teach English for many, many years, and I know just what you're talking about. And that's a great idea. Have I missed something in the chat?
I would just follow up on, this is James, I would just follow up on Morgan's comment. I've had conversations with English colleagues about readers, and they say, well, our students have to respond to something that was published in the New Yorker or in the Atlantic, or, in, quote unquote, fancy East Coast publications, because that's what the proper model should be.
That's a great point.
And Maureen, there's been a few other comments, some great ideas. Felicia shared that she wanted to give her students more choices about how they turn in their final project. So not just written essays, but PowerPoints. And I'm sorry if it's scrolled past. I can't find my scroll button, Felicia. So I think that's a wonderful idea, that's of open practices. And we had a few other comments as well. Someone mentioned, I think it was Maureen, she's looking for some research on this potentially, or some documentation, not documentation, but further resources, OER resources that fit this topic. Oh, specifically literature, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I see a couple of people with hands raised, and I'd like to acknowledge them if I could. We can start with Jessica, and then we'll go to Emma, and I apologize if you raised your hands in a different order.
Thank you so much, Kim. I have two thoughts to share. One, I am a historian as well, a medievalist, and I teach Spanish history and Spanish language. And I think one element is to address the racism and exclusion that has happened throughout history, and talk about it. When I was studying in my undergraduate, it was never talked about. Isn't that strange? It was like almost like it was just kind of skipped over. And as I progressed in my degrees, I was very shocked about some of the things I learned, and it changed my opinion, of course. But addressing some of the racism that happened in other countries and even here, but in reference to that culture in the past and currently in the present. And then my other thought is about language use, maybe connecting with the previous person's mention about language use. As I teach Spanish from a position of privilege as a white woman, sometimes I'm teaching Hispanic students Spanish. And I have to step back and remember that that language is a creative process. And so I often mix languages. And so the one really important thing is to never it's more about sharing the language. And so sometimes we'll be speaking mixed Spanish and English. So I think just kind of addressing that as a white person teaching in a foreign language class, I'm in a position of privilege and power, and I have to put myself more in as a facilitator and a supporter of language use from all students.
Well, thank you for those comments. And that nicely relates to what I think Morgan was getting at as well with that. You know, it used to be my students would say, well, I don't speak proper English. And I'd have to say, you know, that's just standard grammar. That's not necessarily proper, you know, and you know, so I hear you, and I think those are very valuable contributions. Thank you. And if I can just say one more quick thing, Emma, before you make your comments, we have one case. We do want to showcase all of these, but we wanted to talk to you more. But one of the projects is a history professor who was doing what he calls radical archiving with his students. And he already has a site called the Delano Project, which I know I mispronounced yesterday, really embarrassing, but the Delano Project and our California story, he already has sort of started with this, but he is empowering his students and giving them voice and empowering them to understand that their history, their contributions to their local communities and to the legacy and the history of their place and the culture, all of that, he's empowering his students that way. So that reminds me of that project, Jessica, as you were talking about your experiences as a Spanish language teacher. So thank you for that. And then Emma, you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Emma. I teach ESOL with Peralta colleges. And since coming on to teaching online with Zoom, I've had to completely, I don't know, flip and transform how I teach, why I teach, and who I teach. I have so many different nationalities, religions, cultures in my class, and ages and disabilities. This semester, I have been doing something. The first 5 minutes of class, I celebrate one student's culture and the country they come from, the languages they speak. And I show pictures and little videos. And then I give them a moment to share with the class, you know, what do they love most about the country they come from? And it really brings compassion and empathy and cross-cultural competence. And one more thing I want to add is, in addition to that, within my curriculum, and I've been creating all my curriculum from scratch because there's no textbooks that represent my students very well, and it's really hard to find good online material as well. I use my students' lives, I use their names, I use the countries they come from and the languages they speak as content for my language lessons. So let's say I'm doing a grammar lesson. I will literally create sentences about Cambodia or Vietnam or Mexico, and I'll put my students' names in there, and I will try to find visual representation of a woman wearing a hijab, right? That can represent one of my students from Yemen. So there's a lot that we can do. And I feel really privileged to be in this movement of transformation and revolution of education. It's so special. And yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, I feel the same way with that feeling that you have. And thank you for sharing those thoughts, and how empowering, you know, to acknowledge, because I wanted to talk, you know, just say a little something about just sort of honoring the lived experiences of your students and acknowledging that, and also recognizing the value of that and what that brings. Brooke, I see your hand.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, actually, something that I've recently started to think about because of this conference and a few other things that I've exposed myself recently to is I teach English as well as humanities, and I have some colleagues here today from Pima Community College. And you know, I teach intercultural perspectives class, and I teach our standard composition classes as well, and I've been working on acknowledging the racism in our systems and that history, but I can't remember, I think it was in something yesterday as well as in some other things that I've been reading, but focusing on successes you know, the successes of different groups rather than just constantly the struggles, right? And the oppression and all of those sorts of things. And so that's something I feel like I actually need more material to share with my students, not just on, you know, all the horrible things that have happened to people, but what about the things that we need to celebrate and acknowledge, and more of that emphasis on the contributions in my courses.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Brooke. Two things come to mind. One, you mentioned your English, and we kind of laugh because there's a lot of sort of humanities-based people here today, but we just kind of want to throw out there as well. We were very intentional when we chose faculty from varied disciplines, and we have math projects and science projects that are infusing anti-racist pedagogy into those classes. One student in science, or excuse me, one participant who teaches science to non-biology majors is recontextualizing a couple of the modules in that class to sort of refocus on vaccinations and COVID-19 and things like that. And then the other thing I wanted to say about your comments is, you know, that's when we can bring the students, and that's part of those open pedagogical approaches, is empowering the students to be the creators of content, not just the consumers of. And yes, let's hear your stories. And it's not, you're right, all about struggles. There's a lot to celebrate and a lot of beauty and a lot of, you know, good that and value that we've yet to hear about from our students. So thank you for that. Kathy?
Oh, Kim, can I, one moment, Kathy, before you speak, I just wanted to add one more thing in response to Brooke. You know, you made a really good, thoughtful comment. And one of the things we were trying to emphasize with our participants is, just as you were saying, celebrating contributors in the field, so that also students see themselves as actually belonging to their learning, like as participants in the learning, so seeing themselves reflected as contributors, so that they, as Kim was saying, they're not just consumers of the learning, but they see themselves reflected in it. So celebrating the contributors and of others in the field, the others, those voices that often are not included, as a ways that students can see themselves reflected. And again, sort of dismantling the whole concept that there is sort of this one framework and one voice to each of our disciplines. So sorry, Kathy, please proceed. I just wanted to add that comment.
But thank you, Joy, for adding that comment. Thank you very much.
Yes, and no problem. I just wanted to say that I gave a presentation yesterday that touched on a lot of these questions, and I've created 34 assignments dealing with critical and open pedagogy. And I will put the link to them in the chat, but they're fully openly licensed and adaptable and meant to be templates for anyone wanting to give assignments that engage students in creating information. For example, I have students read books by lesser known Latin American authors, and then they create SlideShare PowerPoint presentations that are openly licensed and shared with the world. And so this is a way of getting stories out that generally are left out of, you know, the official story. This is what my presentation was about. And I also want to say some of those assignments can help engage students in gathering future readings to become part of your new, like a new curriculum, or at least to supplement your curriculum. So I'll put the link in the chat. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing that with us. How fantastic is that? Great examples of open pedagogy. I don't see hands raised, so that brings to mind, I did want to tell you about a project when Joy was speaking about students seeing themselves reflected. What are the contributions? Who are the other contributors in your field? That calls to mind another one of our projects, one of our science teachers. Again, I just want to kind of emphasize STEM because humanities, everybody always says it's easy to see how we can do it. So in this particular course, she's encouraging her students to just sort of research about a scientist, but to find, you know, she encourages them to seek out people that look like them and people who share similar cultures or backgrounds, etc. Because again, a lot of, as someone mentioned in the chat, I can't keep up with it all and it's fantastic and thank you, but someone had mentioned like women in technology and STEM, for example. So, you know, you see more examples of that, and women astronauts and things like that. So I just wanted to bring that point up. I really appreciate that everybody's just sort of jumping within all these, you know, just talking about either open pedagogy or anti-racism. And I think I heard someone was going to say something. I think I misheard. Well, what I was saying is I feel like in the conversation that we are having, though, people are jumping into, you know, various parts of these questions. So I'm not going to, you know, go through them. But I was wondering if anybody in the audience does publish, and Kathy, you sound like someone who has great experience with their students. Some of our participants really struggle with how do we like sort of not recreate that, you know, kind of like colonization, because even as we try to break down the traditional power structures in the classroom, a lot of times we're looked at as the authority in the classroom. And so if we want students to participate, and even if we give them an opt-out, they feel like kind of like they're letting you down. And so we're just talking about the politics of all of that, and didn't know if anyone, we have some resources, of course, but I think it's an interesting topic to talk about. You know, you want to empower students, but you also don't want to take advantage of them or put them in a situation that, does anybody have experience around that they'd like to talk about?
Well, I'll share. I think one of the key things that I try to do that I find to be a challenge doesn't have to do with materials, but that quote you shared, Joy, is so fantastic, right? It's so true. And that is, you know, oftentimes my practice now is really to invite students to tell me what their goals are and what kind of feedback they want and how they want to be assessed. And they almost always just reinforce the hierarchical structures that already exist, right? And the sort of supremacy already in place. And so it's always kind of a challenge because they just want you to do what's always been done to them, right? And finding ways to undo that is difficult, especially when our system is simply set up to give me power over them. I was sharing, I came yesterday and I was sharing, I'm working on a similar project at Pima Community College on equitable grading practices and anti-racist grading practices. And you know, that's a tool of dominance, right? That we have to use in most of our institutions, and trying to sort of subvert that is really challenging. And so I don't know, I'm interested to hear from the group as well as any other participants too, and, you know, taking this concept of anti-racism and helping people understand it. And I find myself being drawn a lot more recently to just the term supremacy and the problem with hierarchy and supremacy and the ways in which those concepts are so embedded in our systems and our culture that I don't know if it's more accessible, easier for people to understand, you know, hierarchy and supremacy as opposed to racism or anti-racism. But I don't know. It's always a struggle to sort of combat this structure, this hierarchical structure we've got in place.
Thank you for those comments, Brooke. I see Kathy. Yes, please.
Those are really good points and questions. And I just have something to offer. In one of these ways I tried to take down the hierarchy is when it came to the whole late policy for assignments, I ended up just having the class democratically decide and vote on what the late policy was going to be. I also, once I have them design the final exam and submit questions. So there are some of these things we can do that really tries to, you know, break down that you're the teacher and, you know, you're superior to me. I come to class and students seem so scared, and I don't know, I shudder to think what experiences they've had with teachers before they come to me and they seem frightened, and it's tough. It's tough to really get them to open up and trust that I'm their friend. So I am also looking for more ways to do this.
Thank you, Kathy. I was going to also mention late penalty. I used to not have a late penalty. I would tell my students, first of all, everything's negotiable basically. And based on how you've done in the class up to this point, I'll negotiate with you what the deal will be with this paper or whatever. And then I'd also sometimes tell them, I was late getting this graded, so I'm extending the deadline on this till then because you didn't have enough time to process that feedback from me and that sort of thing. And that helps to break it down and to build trust and to show. But at the same time, I'd like to say that I had many colleagues that, did not respect my methods. And, I was kind of ahead of my time a little bit. I didn't realize I was being equitable. I didn't realize that. But a lot of my faculty didn't, or colleagues thought I didn't have rigor or I didn't, and that sort of thing, because that's something we can, if you made it and you're on this side of it, I guess some people like to kind of hold on to that feeling of power or supremacy that Brooke has referenced. Because maybe that's part of why you became a teacher or something, who knows? That's a different time and a different paradigm. Anyhow, back on topic, other materials to share, approaches to share, or questions anyone has.
Well, James, I'll just toss out another example just to share this with the collective. An example that occurs to me is really low-hanging fruit that speaks to the benefit of open education over commercial products is representation through images. If you look at, Una referenced a study by a colleague, Shauna Brandel, that examined commercial textbooks and OER textbooks. They were equally poor in the representation of traditionally marginalized groups. But with an open textbook, because of the open license, you can change that. And a low-hanging fruit is to change the images. There are studies out there that examine undergraduate textbooks in biology, as well as medical school textbooks, that find that 90% of the images of the human body have white skin. And I guarantee you, I'm not a scientist, but I don't think 90% of the human race has white skin. So working with your students, if you're using an open textbook, you could legally and ethically change the representation textbook. So just to get the wheels turning.
Well, yeah, and Brooke, I see your hand, but I just like to throw out the one piece of data that I know related to that, and that's 20% of the world's population, which is white male, is Western, is writing 80% of the world's knowledge. And that blew my mind when I found that out. That's Siko Butersen. What is it, James? What is her project to make knowledge? Oh, sorry, I can't think of it. I will put it in the chat in a sec. Kevin, did you need to say something or no? I'm sorry.
I was just going to add to James's point. In the training that Peralta put together around its rubric, there is a criterion around images and representation. And in textbooks, not only are light-skinned individuals the dominant thing that you see, but in some anatomy textbooks, the only time you'll see female bodies is in the reproductive system chapter. And so there are challenges like that in other disciplines as well, where people of color aren't shown in leadership positions in business texts, or I could go on, but I know that publishers are more aware of it now, but I'm really excited by initiatives where instructors encourage their students to write letters to the publisher saying why they feel a more representative media in their texts would benefit them as learners. Because there is research that shows if students don't see themselves, they may not be as motivated to complete the learning tasks.
Thanks, Kevin. And I have to say that's that's rampant in our media in general. So it's certainly not an academic only issue. Look at your daily newspaper. You'll see very few women other than in sort of fashion poses. So it's yeah, and very few minority folks unless it's a protest.
I don't know if we have another minute for Brooke. That's the only hand I see left, and maybe we can sort of be closing out with this. I'm not sure of our time. Maybe Peralta or Kevin could remind me if we're good with time. I didn't see it. And Brooke, I'm calling on you in a very confusing way. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Please.
Who's answering? So I am just really interested in, I know you guys are in the project right now, but that question about what do you need to make this happen? I'm really interested to know what you're learning so far about how faculty respond to what they need in order to do this work.
I think Joy can maybe speak to that.
Sure.
No, since
yeah.
you're wraparound services speaker yesterday. Thank you.
Sure. Brooke, that's a really great question. Because we were obviously focusing on OER and open pedagogy, a lot of the feedback from faculty has been sort of how to either, again, they were coming from varying levels of familiarity with OER, but a lot of the support has been sort of the how to adopt OER, or the how do I bring students in. One of the tenets of open pedagogy is legacy projects as opposed to disposable assignments. So some of our participants have been finding ways to include students' work to become legacy projects where they're actually contributing to the editing process. So some of their assignments now in the course, the results of those assignments, the student submissions, become case studies that they will include in the learning moving forward. So really a lot of what they need has been sort of the tangible, like, how do I openly license this? How do I edit OER? Where do I find it? Okay, I've got it. And I recognize here are some of the holes or the gaps. Now what do I do? But we're starting to see folks move beyond, but again, they're in the midst of implementing. So there's still a lot of really great data that I'm sure we're going to glean, and a lot of feedback we're going to glean as they wrap up this initial implementation. But it's really just been around sort of the how to incorporate OER, and then finding those ways really to bring students into the process of filling in those gaps and bringing their work in so that their work lives on, and also so that they can be contributors to their colleagues' future learning. So I hope that answers your question.
I think another need people have, and I think that was great, Joy. Another need is support in terms of like sort of emotional and professional or whatever support. And so that cohort model, I'd kind of like to bring that up. I feel like that's a pretty strong model. And sometimes you can feel like you're working in a vacuum or you're by yourself. Some institutions are more advanced than others. And if you're like the only one at your college or whatever, you can run out of steam. You can sort of get discouraged. So I feel like having that cohort, and that's part of this program's intention. It's a cohort model. They had that 4 weeks of intense time together in the online course, but as they're implementing plans over the course of the semester, they still have each other that they can draw on. And we put them in small groups so they get to know each other and see like whose energies meshed and what projects sort of supported and that sort of thing, and that they were able to forge those kind of personal connections. So I feel like that's another need that I've seen. Sometimes you need some encouragement and you lose heart a little bit. It's a lot of work sometimes.
And Kim, this is James. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but we are over time. This has been such a fantastic, invigorating discussion. And I think myself, at least, I could stay here the rest of the evening, but we want to respect everybody else's time and respect the conference organizers. Thank you, one and all, for being here and engaging in a sincere way. This is really exciting. This is the first time, frankly, that at the Peralta Equity Conference is the first time that we've shared publicly or presented formally about the Open for Anti-Racism project. So we're excited to have positive feedback as the project wraps up in this summer. And we get feedback from surveys and interviews with the participants. We will definitely share more widely. And it's just really exciting to know that so many people care about this work and that so many of you are doing this kind of work in your own institutions and sometimes on your own. We'd love to hear more about what you're doing. You've got contact information for Una and myself there. Feel free to drop us a line sharing what your projects are and what you're doing, and we're happy to direct you to more information about the Open for Anti-Racism project as well. Finally, check out the cccoer.org website for lots of resources around open education and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Una, anything to add before we sign off?
James, there's a nice blog on the website, and I'm sorry I couldn't find the link about this project. It also has some information from Kim and Joy about the development of the program and what it meant to them personally as they went through that. There'll be more posted in the future. We have videos with the participants coming soon, so check back in with us.
Excellent.
Thank you all. Thank you for your presentation. And just a quick reminder, in order for all of us to stay connected as an international community, please feel free to add us on Twitter, which is super active when it comes to OER and equity, and Facebook. So we can continue sharing these resources and find people with similar projects. We'd love to see how this evolves, and we're sure it's going to be wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.